Maggie, master of the chase. With the wisdom that comes from tough experience, Maggie spoke a fundamental truth. The most painful relationships to give up are the ones that never were. She was referring to a year of wrenching grief that had followed the inevitable end of a 4-year affair with a married man. But on a deeper level, she was summarizing a realization that, with few exceptions, her strongest attractions had always been for men whom, in one way or another, she couldn't have. Yet she dreamed of an enduring bond with someone who would desire her without reservation and enthusiastically choose to be hers exclusively. She thought she wanted a man she wouldn't have to pursue. There was no logical explanation for her inability to find such a man. A bright, witty elementary school teacher in her mid-30s with a pleasing face, a shapely body, and a smile that exuded kindness. She obviously had much to offer. Over the years, several men had pursued her, yet she voiced a complaint I have heard often. The normal guys, the stable, dependable ones who would make great husbands, bore me. The exciting ones are all spoken for or on the run. Although her latest affair had been the only one with a married man, 4 others had many similarities, beginning with an energetic youthfulness she found irresistible. Each also had a flair for adventure, both in and out of bed, and a knack for playful spontaneity. All her lovers had also been unreliable at times and could not be counted on to follow through with plans, return phone calls, or remember special dates, important symbols of love for Maggie. She liked men with a rebellious streak, so, not surprisingly, all her boyfriends vigorously refused to be tied down. Yet in each, she perceived a vulnerability that intrigued her. In spite of their precious independence, she once said, they all looked to me for stability and understanding. Maggie had always been an ultra-responsible, good girl who always could be counted on to be cooperative, helpful, sensitive, and obedient. Consequently, although she felt miserable whenever lovers let her down, she admired their freedom to slough off so easily the obligations that dominated her. When it came to intimacy, what Maggie said she longed for most, all her lovers vacillated between openness and avoidance. The emotional expressiveness that excited her was always counterbalanced by a fear of being possessed. It's almost as if they see me as their mother, she mused. During her first few months of therapy, Maggie eagerly theorized about the psychology of each former lover, yet it was exceedingly difficult to get her to focus on herself. As is so often the case for those in the throes of longing, the other person held the key to everything. The goal was always the same, to identify and overcome their hang-ups. In a rare moment of self-reflection, she acknowledged her motivations. If I could just win them over, I would feel loved. And what if a man didn't need to be won? I asked. What if he wanted to love you? After a long silence, she answered, I'm not sure I could handle it. That's when I knew Maggie was ready to direct the spotlight inward, a process that brought her face to face with her commitment to longing as her chief erotic stimulus, as well as her reluctance to accept gratification. At first, Maggie described an almost idyllic childhood. But as she relaxed her automatic tendency to make things look good, a more realistic picture emerged. She never doubted her mother's love, yet Mom usually seemed overwhelmed by responsibilities and duties. I always had a sinking feeling that Mom was close to tears, Maggie recalled. I knew she was terribly unhappy, and it was my job to make it all better, a task at which she usually failed miserably, despite her best efforts. Even as a small girl, Maggie knew that a major reason for Mom's unhappiness was that Dad worked long hours and was often on the road. When he was home, he would be absorbed in the newspaper or TV. He generally rebuffed requests for companionship or conversation, whether from Maggie or her mom. Maggie later learned that her mom often suspected he was having an affair, although she never confronted him. Maggie, too, was unsure of her father's love, since she rarely received more than perfunctory attention from him, and hardly any of the heartfelt affection she craved. As an adolescent, Maggie found comfort in romantic stories and daydreams, most of which revolved around themes of postponed fulfillment, but always with happy endings. The imagery of yearning dovetailed with the affection-starved atmosphere of her home. In her high school boyfriend, she saw the key characteristics that would consistently attract her: a devil-may-care but good-natured rebelliousness that was a natural complement to her nice girl persona, combined with a capacity for exuberant emotionality that was noticeably lacking in both her parents. For 2 years, their relationship went well, though Maggie always wanted more closeness than what she got. After graduation, they went their separate ways. A few years later, when she heard he had fallen in love and married his college sweetheart, Maggie confronted another key feature of her eroticism: a persistent undercurrent of grief and loss. Subsequent relationships all had similar outcomes, often with another woman getting, with apparent ease, the very things Maggie had struggled for unsuccessfully. Each time a man broke a date, stood her up, or withheld affection, she experienced a flood of grief, as if she were being abandoned yet again. She could only be comforted by the apologetic voice and soothing touch of her lover. When that happened, her sadness would melt in a tidal wave of passion, and for a moment she would feel whole. Her affair with the married man had been the most painful of all. From their first encounter, she was convinced that he was the man she had been searching for, the man who possessed all the characteristics that fascinated her. He appeared to be crazy about her, too, and would often express the wish that they could be together always. He never actually promised to leave his wife, but Maggie assumed he eventually would, since he regularly spoke of a lack of love and sex in his marriage. Yet each time he chose to spend holidays or other special occasions with his wife, Maggie sank into despair. Eventually, she could stand it no longer and broke off the relationship. Unfortunately, she had been depressed and obsessed ever since. Sometimes she resorted to desperate acts, such as parking in front of his house for hours, waiting to catch a glimpse of him and his wife together, or telephoning them and hanging up. Repetitions and reversals. Maggie's story highlights one of the most puzzling questions about all troublesome attractions, whether or not they revolve around longing. Why do so many of us repeat erotic patterns that have proven to be sources of suffering and lack of fulfillment? The most obvious answer is that our attractions, no matter how troublesome, work. Despite the pain they ultimately cause, at critical moments, they are gloriously successful at generating ecstatic passion. It is difficult to overestimate what potent reinforcers such passions are. Luckily, most of us learn from our failed relationships lessons that eventually steer us toward more workable partnerships. Repetitive, problematic attractions are not so easily modified, which is why some people have, in recent years, labeled them love addictions. Calling Maggie's tragic search for love an addiction may provide an illusion of understanding. If, however, we genuinely wish to uncover the sources of difficult attractions, we must reject easy labels and venture inward where the erotic mind has its own ways and reasons. Maggie first encountered longing in response to the pain of not feeling loved by her father. Unfulfilled cravings for affection defined the key problem her CET was trying to resolve. As her eroticism evolved, she discovered, but only semi-consciously, that by continually placing herself in positions of longing, she could convert her pain into passion. Logic suggests that someone in Maggie's position might be drawn to men who, unlike her father, would be naturally warm and loving. And true enough, the men she found most irresistible were capable of great warmth and tenderness, but never consistently. To select a man who would love her wholeheartedly, Maggie would need to bypass the very dilemma her CET was designed to reverse: how to get someone who seems ambivalent to change his mind and love her without reservation. At her most passionate moments, that's exactly what happened, at least for a while. Unfortunately, her CET forced her to select men who were not readily available. Otherwise, she couldn't anticipate the reversal that was the overriding goal of her eroticism. Her passion only sprang to life when fulfillment seemed possible, but just beyond her grasp. In a moment of stunning clarity, Maggie articulated the essence of her problem. What really turns me on is almost being loved. Maggie's dilemma is far from unique. Millions of people gravitate toward partners who appear to possess characteristics similar to those of significant others, parents, siblings, special friends, who have let them down in the past. Their goal is not primarily to perpetuate the pain, although this tends to be the most frequent outcome, but rather to reenact hurtful situations in hopes they can be reversed, the pain transformed into passion. A complete understanding of Maggie's determination to avoid fulfillment requires one more piece of the puzzle, one Maggie found very difficult to accept. It's true that Maggie's first object of longing was her father, but it was through her emotional alignment with her mother that she learned on a day-to-day basis the ways of longing and sadness. Remember how desperately Maggie struggled to make her mom feel better. While it doesn't make sense logically, it is difficult for most of us to grow beyond our parents, particularly the one after whom we most model ourselves. For Maggie to receive the love she craved, she had to follow a path radically different from her mother's, which seemed to her a terrible act of disloyalty. Pitfalls of power. Longing-based erotic scripts are by no means the only ones with the potential to turn against you. Regardless of the details that energize your CET, what makes your most exciting turn-ons so intense is that they soothe old wounds. Yet there's always the risk your erotic scripts will create the very problems they're trying to resolve, whether these problems originate within the family or within one's peer group. Darren, a need for control.